Hi ho, it's Pixar time, let's freaking go! My name is Micah, and this is the 5th episode of my series Pixar Quality, in which I'm reviewing 25 years of Pixar movies in a personal ranking order from worst to best. Welcome back, I moved house, I now live in a barn, so it's definitely affected the audio quality. What are you gonna do? I can't buy one of these things, I don't make any money off this shit. If you've not seen the previous episodes of this series, give my channel a squiz and bloody figure it out. We're past halfway, you've got homework to do. If you've already watched them, watch them again. It helps me out. Subscribe and shit. I don't care anymore. We're in our groveling era. On the subject of being past halfway, we're definitely already discussing Pixar films that I feel are really strong movies, and today is no exception. This video covers WALL-E, Toy Story, and Toy Story 4, and to be honest, it took me a little while to figure out how I was going to connect these three thematically. Are they all films that my feelings on are somewhat fluid? Are they all technologically impressive and groundbreaking works for their time? Well, yes and yes, but there's actually a stronger link here than either of those. How these three films connect to Pixar's actual sense of prestige, to their brand, and the general standing that they have with the culture and general audiences at any given time, I think is really central to these movies for me. We'll get into it, but obviously, Toy Story is the film that started it all for Pixar, a film which really does still hold up and presents a real argument for why Pixar so quickly became so influential and beloved. It's so easy to see. It set up their stage and it gave them a shot at the prestige they enjoyed for so long. Toy Story 4 is a real soft spot for people for the exact reason in reverse. The drawback of making such a beloved trilogy and enjoying the spoils has been a bit of confusion and resistance to a fourth entry of a franchise that most people, I think, considered to have ended on a pretty brilliant note, at one point myself included. Toy Story 4, at least from people like me within a commentary or opinion space, still encounters resistance directly tied to Pixar's prestige. The perception that it was a cash grab is there because of the success of their previous work, that they couldn't just let the sleeping dog lie, and that their prestige took a hit from producing this movie at all. WALL-E is also tied to Pixar's prestige in that it is, in my belief, a film that was only possible for Pixar to make because of their previous success. You don't get to make that movie, and you don't get that movie to such a beloved status unless your brand is really enjoying some extreme highs. I'm gonna get into it soon. All three of these films have a different relationship and a different tie to the brand of Pixar at different times of their history, and I think act as real bookmarks for the strength of their brand at important moments. The beginning, their peak, and then their most recent shift. Let's get into what I think of these films. Heads up, if you're a massive fan of WALL-E, I'm gonna tell you right now, you're not about to be happy with me. Do I even need to recap the story of WALL-E? I don't even think I do, but WALL-E is a little junk bot left on what appears to be an Earth that's been abandoned for quite some time. He also appears to be one of the last operating robots which were built to help clean up a large amount of trash overwhelming the planet, left to clean up the mess while humans took to space because of pollution overrunning the world. So he collects some trash, he builds some buildings, collects little trinkets he enjoys, hangs out with his little cockroach friend, and he seems pretty happy, but he is just a lonely little guy. And while watching the notorious box office failure movie musical Hello Dolly, we learn of his yearning to hold someone's hand and find love. One day, following a laser pointer, WALL-E finds himself underneath a landing spaceship, which drops a minimalist girl-coded robot drone to look around. We learn her name is Eve, and she's looking for something. WALL-E wants to be her friend, and after a while, convinces her to come chill out at his pad. He tries on some bubble wrap Riz, but when he shows her a boot with a little plant on it, she scans it, freaks out like it's what she's been looking for, snaps it up before going catatonic. WALL-E, unable to wake Eve up, tries to go about his life as per usual, but when Eve is retrieved by a spaceship, WALL-E hitches a ride and finds himself on board the Axiom, a spaceship vessel in which humans live now that they've abandoned Earth. The plant that Eve has found is supposed to be assigned to the ship's captain, that it's time to return to Earth now that life is sustainable on the planet again. But the autopilot and automatic systems on board the Axiom had received a secret transmission a few hundred years prior, saying that Earth has been lost and never to return. The ship's captain learns of the mutiny, begins to resent the malaise that his species has fallen into and starts learning about the planet that his forefathers had left behind. There's various adventures and mishaps, and Wally and Eve try to make sure the plant gets to where it needs to go to send the Axiom back home, fighting against the automatic systems, having a dance in space with a fire extinguisher. Eventually they succeed and the Axiom goes back to Earth, but not before Wally is severely damaged. Eve races back to his pad to repair him, and while for a moment it seems his memory has been lost and her gesture of finally holding his hand is lost on him, Wally returns to his senses, a lonely little guy no more, and the Axiom lands back on Earth, ready to clean up the planet, ready not just to survive, but to live. Alright folks, here's the thing. We're past halfway, and I've done a bunch of work to speak about how everyone's opinions on these very popular films are valid in the episodes leading up. But I'm still no stranger to saying things with my full chest, so with that having been said, I may have made a mistake, because I've been working on these videos for so long that I'd completed episodes ready to go before I got to Wall-E, and by the time I was writing about it again, I'd kind of grown in my thoughts on the entire Pixar catalogue. It's happened already in the background. I've been sitting on a lot of ideas and passion for this series of videos for years by this point, but even in the first episode you can tell, like, I described myself not as being a Pixar nut, saying I'd never really name a pet after them or something, but it turns out that over the course of writing about all the movies and paying very close attention to each in turn, my love and adoration for Pixar has grown in step, and I am now a much bigger fan of Pixar than I even was when I started writing this content. I think I would name a pet after a Pixar character now. I'm low-key planning on doing that. But this growing love for every Pixar movie that I visited on the way up a ranking that I sketched out years ago hit an unexpected bump when I got to Wall-E, and I may have made a mistake in not triple checking. I've found that I'm sort of leaving this one behind. When I think about it, it just doesn't spark that same feeling. I enjoy watching it, of course. Conceptually I think much of it's very rich, and it's such a well-made film. I just think at this point I understand the appeal and the spectacle, but today I just not really sure if it, next to the rest of Pixar's offerings, actually does much for me on any individual front anymore. As a result, when revisiting these films to write about them, Wall-E is the only one that's actually dropped down in my rankings from its original place, and I've put off making this video because of it. Of course I don't want to be firing at Wall-E. What am I, stupid? Wall-E is in this spot, I think, for as much of the things I like about it as it is a representative of every Pixar short. Because as much love is directed at Wall-E for its significant focus on visual storytelling and a somewhat non-verbal screenplay, which is a component of it, it's not as though conveying stories non-vocally or using alternatives to straight dialogue is something that Pixar ever really struggled with. It's actually far deeper in their bones than maybe anything else they've ever done. Quaint, mute characters, strong visual storytelling, and using character movement as the expression are not unique choices for Pixar. They're not even unique for animation. It's what the field is founded on, kind of. What's unique about those choices for Pixar is that it's 90 minutes instead of 4.5. On the topic of Wall-E as a non-verbal story, before I move on, I do feel that particular aspect of the film is actually fairly exaggerated in discourse. Even during the film's extended opening act, there's constantly talking from ads or film clips or vocalizations from Wall-E, Eve the Roach everywhere. It may be limited in terms of dialogue, but in the same way that R2-D2 does convey something to the audience when he beeps, this is still talking, it's just in a different language. The sound design of Wall-E and he as a character is extraordinarily detailed and expressive. That, like, the sound perspective is huge to this as well as the visual one. And to highlight too strongly that this is a movie with no talking, I think is just not very accurate. There is an enormously expressive sound component to every character here that equates to speech. There's vocalizations to convey the correct emotions. He screams, he yells, he makes happy noises. He and Eve have conversations. Maybe it's not in English, but it is talking. I would call this talking. Because he's all like... And then she's all like, that is talking. That is what that is. That's talking. I digress. Before a lot of their earlier films, Pixar had a tradition of featuring a brief short story film before their movies, which, while it's kind of come and gone, their short films remain a wonderful cornerstone of their brand, which can sometimes be a little harder to find, a little harder to appreciate, but is no doubt where their magic is presented in the most potent and focused doses. For the birds, presto, Luxo Jr., I always had a soft spot for one-man band in particular. I love the energy of it, the color choices, the way the music is both the score of the short but also diegetic. One of the players plays the bass instruments and brass, and the other is the higher register and strings as they compete for this one girl's little coin. The green and red designs on top of the muggy, cloudy city, I love it. Pixar shorts are where the studio really began with stuff like Tin Toy, and for a few years in the middle there really did feel like a safe playground for them to try out single ideas and stretch them, prod them, poke them, and exhaust them. Jerry's Game is a really really cool demonstration of editing, how to make one actor look like two characters. Whether it's geography, terror mapping, editing, lighting tests, as the jokes escalate, as the characters get worn through, a rare, rapid, dashing, and experimental side of Pixar finds the light, while they're usually wearing their Sunday best in their films and layering these ideas within much more fuller contexts in the larger films. This kind of experimentation, I think, in the shorter stuff is more relegated to like shorts by Cars or Toy Story, like Tales or stuff at this point, but back in the day, these were really, really cool to watch and get a sample of energy before you watch the full movie. WALL-E is a film, I think, where the spirit and the energy and indeed the tricks of their shorts are most clearly employed in one of their feature-length productions. They translate so easily, almost one-to-one. There's an elegance to it, a thorough love, and a kind of detail present, particularly in that opening act and its characters' methods of physical expression, that to me speaks squarely to the Pixar Animation Studios energy. This kind of stamp makes it really difficult, if not impossible, to imagine this feature film being created by any other studio at any other time in history, to at least the ends of such wide audience appreciation. The singularity of WALL-E and its depth or its connection to Pixar's roots at the time in terms of filmmaking is worth prizing and rewarding. It feels like it's built on top of their library of shorts, like the one kid's sister who went to college and got a really great paying job and made the rest of the family proud. There is definitely a world in which this premise of like a junk robot is explored in 4.5 minutes. It feels like there's something about it that could be compressed and packaged up that way, and the appeal that lends to the film is like this David v Goliath energy, like the little kid that could, and it's really, really charming. There's a real, true, unfakeable brilliance to WALL-E's first half hour for those reasons. The phrase genuine article comes to mind. Animated features for kids were huge around the time this dropped, obviously, but WALL-E has aged so powerfully in regard to how original that opening act still feels, because it never felt like a company looking for an easy movie to make would have approached or even considered this as a story. Genuine article. It stands out because of how strong those initial choices are. I remember watching this when I was younger. I felt like I'd watched a proper film. Understanding that difference was such a powerful change atmospherically. I don't think it still holds that power for me today, but in context, this surely was a sight and a moment. Owed possibly to Stanton's direction, like in Finding Nemo, the powerful sense of atmosphere and beautifully musical editing brings the adventure together with a grace. The combination of setting to score, of character to production design, of what still feels like the absolutely unexpected pairing of Hello Dolly to Ghost Town Trash City America. The whimsy of the music as you're introduced to this planet that feels familiar but strange emphasizes that emptiness so well, but also indicates the core of the film's loving heart immediately. This landscape should be imposing, frightening, horrific even, but the show tunes blossoming from its core is a very calming balm. Not before or since have I seen a film so effectively communicate its own tone that quickly. The size of WALL-E, like the scope of it, I mean, and its use of lenses was the real technical pull for me this time. You got like crash zooms and lens effects, layering and shaking. It really adds to the atmosphere, not just that the world of the film is scuffed up and dirty, but that the film looks as though it was shot by real cameras is a huge component of the look to me, and of many of Pixar's films since, but I don't think until Lightyear did they wear the analog filmic influences so nakedly on the sleeve again. The speed and kind of perfect movement of the robots of the Axiom is matched with this Fincher-esque perfect gliding of the camera, but when like action starts, there's dirt and long lenses and missed focus pulls and gunge to it. It's really compelling and completes the picture in a way that kind of draws a line in the Pixar chronology for me, the films before this and the films after this that look like they're shot on lenses. So as simply as I can put it, on a surface level, if we're just talking filmmaking, editing, atmosphere, sonically, WALL-E probably gets to being as close to a flawless symphony as Pixar were probably capable of conducting at the time. It's spotless. It feels like their history marking a bookend. They made a handful of really strong choices built on impressive tech and expressive animation tied to a premise afforded them by the creative freedom their previous successes seem to have allowed them to have. It's really lovely. But I do strongly believe that it was that cultural capital that they commanded, their reputation, which gave them the ability not only to make this movie, but for it to be received as well as it was. It's not really something I can prove, but it's also something I firmly feel that for some reason, if Pixar released this exact same movie today, it would not be beloved, it would not be embraced, it would be torn limb from limb by right-wing shills for one, but its altogether flimsy messaging wouldn't hit the right nerve, its love story wouldn't crack your shell, the weak, broad consumerist commentary would be laughed at with a bemused half smile and dismissed as being a bit on the nose by anybody else. It was produced at a time where like their success and untouchability gave Pixar basically free rein on being weird. They were at the top of the industry, untouchable, pioneers, nobody was in sight. Alongside Ratatouille, from a writing perspective, the first half of WALL-E is so art housey and strange that it doesn't feel like a movie they could have gotten away with making at any other time, because they tried and they didn't. But whereas Ratatouille is a surprisingly artsy movie when you stop to think about it, it still, first and foremost, feels like a good story, like a good movie. WALL-E, however, kind of flips it and wears the artsy filmic distinction on the sleeve, uses that spectacle as the hook. It wants to be a tower of industry, a film. But what is the story? To cut it short, we can praise the non-dialogue of it, but because it's all about the visual, WALL-E to me trades on face value like a plastic surgeon does. So I'm not going to pay it to give me a heart transplant. I think this is the most aesthetically focused Pixar entry. Maybe as a result of restrictions on its storytelling tools, but regardless of why, it's really focused on the superficial. It's a very straightforward, lacking in depth film in a lot of areas since it is so easy to interpret. It's as wide and beautiful as the ocean, but don't try to step in it because you're not going to get very far. It's all about the visual here. I struggle with this since Pixar is a studio founded on the belief that animation is not necessarily a genre, it's an idiom. Their most beloved entries, Ratatouille, The Incredibles, the entire Toy Story franchise, Finding Nemo, Brad Bird says it all the time, these are films which say something about the human spirit that put awesome stories at the forefront. That's why they succeed for me, that's where they continue to succeed for me. WALL-E is, I think, one of the only times that Pixar actually strayed from a foundational core principle behind their whole operation that said they're great storytellers first that happen to be working in animation. WALL-E is so involved in the visual, not only as a film but as a component of its story, that it cost it a story. The first half hour of the movie is WALL-E wandering around Earth, and then the second 2/3 of the film is just a straight up MacGuffin quest to get back to the spot where the film was interesting while you continue to just take in the world around you. The plot is very, very thin. The beats are very, very vague, because this is a visual feast and it's adorable, but WALL-E gets the points for being abstract and pioneering and non-dialogue, like it's some kind of meditative masterwork and not just a pretty straight adventure picture once the first third is over. This isn't Under the Skin, okay? It's not a Ghibli movie. It's an adventure film. It's the same as Onward. It's the same as both Nemo movies. It's really not all that. The moment I look beyond the visual, I find WALL-E to be a somewhat regressive and romanticized Hollywood story more than an earnest emotional project, because it's both at once one of the first Pixar projects with a strong female coded antagonist, but still has that annoying twist of manic pixie dream girl to that love story. For some reason that's okay in this instance because they're robots and not people. WALL-E dressing up the passed out catatonic girl character is funny, not weird. It is a manic pixie dream girl movie, right? The lonely boy learns everything he knows about love from Hollywood movies and then projects a borderline obsessive attitude as the first woman he meets and hounds her with advances until she gives in. It's a cynical lens for me to use. It's in there a bit, right? It's manic pixie. He learns all he knows from movies. How good are movies, right? Look at the movie Humans made before they shot up to space. Put on your Sunday clothes, there's lots of world out there. But like somewhat contradictorily, today I find the movie to have a somewhat unkind at best idea of humanity's desire to preserve their own history and culture when removed from their land. It's either unkind or it's laughable. You pick. In telling a story of a global store having power over the essence of human culture and the function of human activity, the film is involved in what to me today kind of feels like a myopic American sensibility at its most plain. It's not about how true any of this may ring. It's not about how Amazon's actually a thing that exists. The film is at once playing into like history and musicals and the appeal of yesterday for its tone, yet the power of that is used to break through a ridiculous plot device that humans would ever be contented with forgetting the power of yesterday themselves just to play automatic mini golf. Do you know what people buy on Amazon? Anime merch. They use the store to buy a 3D printer so they can make a piece of art. They buy a shirt with a band name on it. They're not subscribing to Prime to watch Jeff Bezos sit in a chair. They're watching art on it. Consumerism for its own sake is not the driving engine of human culture. It's art. There is no art or culture or expression on the axiom. I think that's fucking stupid. Like, I'm a musician. I'm an art commentator. Of course, I laugh at a premise which depends on the notion that humans, no matter how much time passes, would ever cease needing to express themselves themselves, would ever cease educating their children on their history, would ever stop telling each other stories or writing songs, would ever willingly turn a blind eye to, like, as a collective species, to the value of artistry and expression. And I think coming from a Disney subsidiary, it's pretty rich for the film's message to be predicated on both the evil of monopoly, but equip the savior of curiosity with the magic of cinema as his anthem. It's like a reverse Planet of the Apes, but I just don't buy this as a platform for a story. It feels like an inauthentic way to talk about artistry and expression, to remove humans from it. Like, what are you talking about? You want to know how else I know WALL-E wouldn't be embraced today? It's called Incredibles 2, a movie that didn't get anywhere near away with this. Gesturing in the direction of commentary on how people were being enslaved by screens and media hype driving public discourse, got the film into muddy waters with audiences, and anyone over the age of 15 raised their eyebrow at it. WALL-E uses an old film now owned by Disney to free people from a consumer superpower. Isn't that ass backwards? It's self-defeating. WALL-E is able to see the beauty in the everyday, teach it to other malfunctioning robots. Eve is seemingly born with her own personality, but the gopher and the autopilot are just fixed points who never evolve to have their own views. They're also robots. Like where's the consistency here? When it comes to like the consumerist commentary or the environmental message, I think the film is extraordinarily broad. There's no depth here. It's one hell of a Barnum statement of a film. I think people have voices, and that's what makes them people. Here we go. The film suggests that the very worst thing you can devolve into if separated from culture, allow machines to do things for you, and fail to appreciate the world around you is be fat and disabled. Being fat and disabled isn't just a de-evolution of the human form, apparently. It doesn't just turn you into a dependent baby and a witless, incurious child. It's actually your own fault for not being active enough if you wound up that way, according to this movie. Big fucking yikes. No, Micah, it's not fatphobic. Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. I've danced this dance with my comment section before. I know how it goes. They say a list of things. They say it's not that deep. It's just a kid's movie. They didn't mean it like that. Or I like this movie and I turned out okay. And then I respond with a list in return saying actually it is that deep because the film is regarded extremely highly and needs to be held to a standard. It just being a kid's movie is bullshit and you know it. And even if it's a pretty fucked message to send your kids. I don't really care if they intended it or not. You don't have to be malicious on purpose for your actions to have bad consequences. And you very well may have liked this movie and come out okay personally, but I'm not talking about the quality of your character. I'm talking about a movie. Please, for your own sake, don't mix one with the other. I'm just talking about the film. Pixar have been very open about how the concept for these humans was initially that in the 700 years or something since they left Earth, humans had actually evolved to become weirder alien sludge creatures who didn't resemble humans at all. I think that might have been a better idea completely, but they seem to think that disclosing this publicly was just a nice fun fact and not kind of like a really hateful thing to do. I'm not here to talk about body positivity or fat phobia in media. That's a massive, massive topic that is easily the most toxic place on the internet right now, I think, but it's absolutely worth putting this film in the larger context of that. A seemingly harmless, adorable family film like this trades on a surface level of a deeply problematic aspect of society that is hugely personal for everybody because it deals not only with the feeling we have to our physical vessels, but how people view others and the function of society as a whole, how society should run or treat the ideal human body or human way to behave. It positions a subset of people on the planet in the crosshairs as ripe for judgment, as if they are literally a lesser form of human who need help from curious, healthy people to intervene or something. That a Pixar film, a company built on telling stories about family and belonging and loving yourself, so carelessly traded on the caricature of fat or disabled people for almost no reason when there were so many better options available is not worth letting slide. What are you talking about? It's important to me that I acknowledge that that happened. Like, it doesn't depict them as like malicious or evil people, but it does depict them as lazy and incurious and stupid, and like the people on board the Axiom once they're woken up from their computers are all nice and help people around them get their wits and help WALL-E and Eve or whatever. But I'm just putting forward that in certain ways, like on certain days, this ain't that cute. this really ain't that fucking cute. I get that they're meant to resemble like small helpless children, like big babies, but the public received them as fat people, as disabled people with mobility aids that they can choose to leave behind if they just stop being lazy. Tell me your film was made in the 2000s without telling me your film was made in the 2000s. I don't have the time to get into, or the expertise frankly, to get into body dysmorphia conversations that this contributes to, as if the visual aspect of health is the only part that matters, but like equating body weight and mobility directly with a lack of physical or mental health, as if larger people or disabled people choose to be ignorant of the world around them and choose to live in ill health like this film seems to think that they do, is again not a platform for a story I think is interesting or compelling or worth complimenting for its perceived depth. As if healthy, curious people need to interfere and open people up to what they're missing. It's just another reminder of how WALL-E is the most surface level, superficial, aesthetically focused Pixar entry, and that really isn't something that I think helps it actually make a point or be a good movie. Not every film needs to have a message or something or be anything more than just a nice experience. It's under no obligation, but I take issue with the idea of how WALL-E is generally regarded in the public consciousness as a film with a lot to offer when I really don't think it is. It's plainly superficial, surface level, without a great deal of substance to hold on to. You don't have to look very far to see like many opportunities where things could have been a lot more nuanced than they are. That I've seen this declared as a social studies masterwork makes me itch. It's broad, blunt strokes of 2000s American-centric sensibilities, imagining a dystopia of convenience which doesn't seem to answer any of the questions posed by its own ill-conceived premise. I guess it's saying something along the lines of things improve when we take action, and leading a charge against mindless complacency. Autopilot represents blind obedience, WALL-E embodies curiosity, whimsy, conviction, and a kind of innocent determination to see more, to know more, which the captain also shares once he's shown how. Do the work to learn more about your surroundings and you'll see more things to love. Never mind that the captain learns it all from a computer, which reads it to him aloud. Sitting back and letting things happen to you or blindly following what you're told to do is a way to let your life fall into a malaise. It's a nice enough message, but it's also very obvious and doesn't actually take a lot of courage to voice. My interest in that first act is so sharp because it feels like the abstract and the quiet of its tools are contrasted to a massive scope. It's so interesting to feel like these little tiny moments are so daunted within the context of an abandoned world. It's a little story in a big place. It's what Pixar does best. My boredom arrives as soon as it removes itself from that great context, narrows the opportunities into the funnel of a straight adventure picture and exceedingly bland MacGuffin quest disguised as an environmental message or something. Pay attention to the world, live, take care of the planet. It's better to live than to survive. Yep. Points for breadth. I don't find it relatable. I don't find it compelling as a human today. It's just a nice movie to watch. Everything the movie, at least to me, seems to place into its substance is like having a discussion with a person who isn't there. I definitely always felt that way about it. It's like talking to a brick wall. The hard part is that most of the stuff it does with visual storytelling or production design, music or humor, since it has very little basis in nuance, is quite easily superseded by later entries that have both. If its claim to fame is technological prowess, welcome to the world 20 years later. I find it very easy to dismiss this movie. They've done better on every single front. They just have. WALL-E is in many ways a beautiful, graceful film with a wealth of life and humor and tenderness. I don't feel I'm outside of its demographic. I feel it relies on me being kind to it in order for it to succeed because it is so broad. Or relies on making sure the gloves are still on when you turn it over to assess it, and that's what the Pixar prestige buys it. When they're at the top of the industry, it buys everybody a pair of gloves. I'm not taking that road. I'm not laying off the thin story aspects, however well-meaning, because of who it came from or at what time. I'm not going to congratulate a film for a largely non-vocal script when it doesn't have one of those, and that it wouldn't even be new territory for the studio if it was. What I enjoy about WALL-E, or at least what reaches and retains my interest today, is purely cosmetic and is pretty contained to that first act. As soon as we get to the Axiom, I'm quite checked out. A solo protagonist, the balance of multiple musical styles, both diegetic and non, the more realistic shooting with vignettes, dust effects, sound design, there's a tactility, a physicality to that opening act amongst its tonal singularity for Pixar that really still transports me back to a different time and speaks to some ideas of work and ambition thematically to me now, like being locked up in the 9 to 5, being comfortable in your routine at home, but still longing for something more, feeling that there has to be more to life than this. Yeah, like the homegrown fantasy of escape is where WALL-E kind of clicks a bit for me. What he finds strange and new about the axiom is similar to what Eve finds curious about his knickknacks in his container. It's the outside perspective to a life all but set in stone, which sheds new light on the novelty, brings hope back to a dead ship, points in the direction of a new start. It's a cosmetic fantasy of going on an adventure with someone who breaks open your somewhat quiet discontentment with routine, much more so than a strong comment on environmentalism or social degradation to me, about letting new people with new eyes into your life. So again, like, WALL-E is a film my feelings on are quite fluid, and perhaps that's either intended or to the film's credit. It's a much more broad emotional point than I'm usually looking for. I want substance, I want a point of view from a film, obviously, I'm a video essayist. I just don't think it's worth overestimating how much substance this film actually presents, and I definitely think the cultural capital that Pixar were commanding at the time brought this film so much of the warm reception on its own. I really do believe that. But I do yearn for a time where Pixar's boldness, which they still very much have in them, to a much greater extent than this, I think, is accepted and seen with the love and open arms that people still have for WALL-E. Like, the best parts about it are the bits where it is the most bold, where there are no humans, where there is a direct yet perfect clash of music and setting, where the grace with which the animation is conducted matches the grace with which the scene puts forth a love of its own. The soul of WALL-E is appealing, is underdog, is filmic and bold, and those are the things worth taking the time to look for. And I really wish that the way this underwhelming, flawed film was embraced for its best aspects was something I got to see for Pixar's current work still, because their current work is just so much better than this, and all it's getting is like combative, chilly receptions from people who are holding on to this for really not a whole lot of a reason. So I kind of just ripped WALL-E a little bit, but this is Toy Story, and regardless of whether you like this movie or not, you put some goddamn respect on that name. You take your shoes off when you come in the house. This isn't just any animated franchise, this is Toy Story. It's the animated franchise of my generation, at least. I'm about to tuck my shirt in and take my elbows off the table. If WALL-E is the most superficial of Pixar films, Toy Story is the natural opposite by necessity. Computer graphics had already seen use in many films like Tron or various Disney films like Aladdin, but its primary function in those films at the time seemed to be to convey a sense of scale, or simply to add a new visual trick to the tool belt of an already great looking movie. But with the release in 1995, Toy Story was the first film made entirely with computer generated images, and it succeeded by focusing on the story. Toy Story is the only Pixar film that I've never been without, the only one which predates me as a human on this earth, and so it's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. It's definitely one of the first films I ever saw, one of the first VHS tapes I ever pushed into a machine. The images were some of the first that I remember creating feeling in me, and yes, some of these characters were the first toys that I ever owned. Now, I love Pixar, but I love Toy Story. One of my most firmly held opinions is that it is one of the best and most important franchises in cinema's history. When people ask the question about what's the best trilogy in films, they always seem to forget it. We know that the first film is revolutionary, but every film in the series is built on a foundation of doing the impossible. They did it every single time. The first film showed that creating feature-length productions entirely within computers wasn't only viable, it was breathtaking. It was the way of the future. Toy Story 2 did the impossible behind the scenes, overcoming hurdle after hurdle. Originally a direct-to-DVD release on a very tight deadline, with even accidental deletions of the entire film couldn't stand in its way of not only being released, but also really solidifying Pixar as a power in filmmaking that could not be ignored. Toy Story 3 proved that a revisitation to the franchise all that time later could render a generation of people useless behind the wheels of their cars, clutching as they were for the breath that the film stole from them on their drives home from this billion-dollar juggernaut. And Toy Story 4 proved... well, we'll get to that. The point is, I fucking love Toy Story, and I don't care who knows it, and I do think that it is, even still where it is, it's underappreciated, because no amount of love is too much for it. The biggest piece of praise I think I can give this first one, The Grandparent, the first 3D animated feature in cinema, is so short but so meaningful. Toy Story, even nearly 30 years on, is as good as you remember. It holds up not just like a classic does, but like a titan of industry does. Not just Pixar, but the film industry and the world as a whole is a vastly different place if Toy Story isn't a great movie. I don't think it's entirely exaggerating to say that the innovations which led to Toy Story being made and how excellently they came together for this picture would be akin to, in a ballpark of significance for the medium of filmmaking as we've seen unfold, as the ability to record speech and sound for films. Computer-generated images are as important as the ability to record sound. In how talkies eventually made silent films redundant or old hat and revolutionized the entire film industry, computer graphics eventually caused enough of a shift for animation spaces that 2D films, a style in which Disney had built their name for decades, at least on this scale of filmmaking, went the way of the dinosaur. While there's still lots of 2D shows around like your BoJack Horsemans and your Family Guys and your Simpsons, etc., and your Bob's Burgers, you're not seeing 2D movies for very long after 3D became the standard. And the use of CG in live action films is tied to that as well. After a few years, you couldn't turn a profit even on a merge of the two, like in Treasure Planet or Titan AE. The road to El Dorado would almost spell the death of DreamWorks entirely as they lagged behind. People were suddenly not interested in seeing 2D films anymore. These are all good movies as well. Ironically, 2D just didn't have that draw. Computer graphics and 3D animation changed cinema. They changed kids' entertainment, television, advertising, video games, everything media related, and we still feel those effects today. That's Toy Story. It's probably one of the 20 most important films ever made, and it is as good as you remember. It's funny, it's tense, it's memorable, it's daring, it's brash. It's made partially of nightmare fuel, partially of wit, the rest of pure imagination, with one winked eye to the adults in the room to top it off. An unforgettable soundtrack, a wickedly precise eye for production design, and powerful, hilarious, committed voice performances from some of the best in the biz. On every front that truly matters, this film really does hold up. Like Finding Nemo, this is another instance where I don't really feel the need to recap this movie, or may accidentally leave some of the obvious stuff unsaid. The film is so ingrained into my sense of the world that I just assume that everybody knows it and knows what they think of it. It's that rare kind of movie I don't think you get to have your own opinion about. It's Toy Story. So it's probably harder for me to view Toy Story now than most other Pixar films, honestly, because it's really easy to take for granted, or to do the opposite, to view it only through the lens of context and resist holding it against modern standards. Of course that needs to be taken into account, but I think this is just a film that truly does transcend its context. It's far better for the time than it really has any right to be, and I think the fact that it obviously stands shoulder to shoulder with so much else from the field all this time later is a reason why it's so difficult to judge it fairly or say anything new. It didn't just prove that computer animation works for films, I think it set a benchmark for them, and I genuinely don't know if it's been replaced or removed from that conversation completely since. It remains a film that's worth studying, learning from, and using as a reference for the field today because it's so well made and emotional, even with just enough computer power to get it done. Because not a second of energy is wasted. Every choice feels like it makes sense because they were all so difficult to achieve. You're not going to spend months making your computer do something it's never done before if it's not going to serve the film. Animation's really hard now, of course, but the challenges are different now than when they used to be. And on these days, your phone has more computing power than anything this film was made on. So the fact that Toy Story is based on such a solid foundation of what makes a movie good, without having any, from today, the technology to distract from those basic filmmaking ideals, is why it still succeeds. It's a house built on the rock. It's not going to too many environments. It's keeping its characters the focus of the attention. It's not trying to do insane, crazy things and go to a completely fantastical world. Keeping you within a familiar setting allows you to cut corners. There's a plasticity to the early Pixar films, so that works if your characters are made of plastic, right? It's embracing those constraints. What immediately draws my attention as a viewer from it today is kind of how dark and mean it feels today. It's raw, it's close up and muggy. Part of this is an effect of the story for sure, but personally I also feel the dated nature of its visuals does emphasize that spooky feeling in a way which honestly really works for the film considering the story. The difference between cozy and small spaces and open barren landscape, the strange proportions of humans and animals, the plastic atmosphere, and in particular the powerful lighting, atmosphere, and color choices, the stark designs. When it chooses to be uncomfortable, the lack of comfort that the film can present feels really eerie and rigid. Like the close framing feels intimate and confronting. This includes the movement animation. The idea of how all of the toys do look like there were toys designed in the world by different people for different ages, from different eras, from different kinds of plastic. Like Rex is a cheap plastic toy with few articulation points, but Buzz is this shining, preening action figure thing with like reflections. That lack of cohesion in design is so rarely called for. Usually characters should all look within like the same family of fonts, as it were, conjured from a unified artistic voice with a chosen style. Toy Story needs to skew that and achieve that simultaneously, to make the toys look different and incohesive, and yet like they all belong in the movie. This first entry's dated visuals helps that feeling, where toys like Woody and Buzz look so good together, but for the most unexpected reasons. This snake and the strongman genuinely feel out of place in the best way. A rad 90s egg version of Russian nesting dolls, an Etch-a-Sketch. The balance of licensed toys to all new creations is really nice here and remains mostly for the whole franchise, and lends this sense of legitimacy to these new toy designs to see Woody standing next to a real Etch-a-Sketch. And it's interesting to see how well informed each toy's personality is by their design or manufacturing. Woody is a sheriff, so he's the leader. Buzz, however, is kind of a space sheriff, so they compete for the same space. Mr. Potato Head is a cheaper toy who's regularly broken and in pieces, so yeah, it makes sense he'd be a little grumpy. The collective of aliens in the claw machine all speaking as one, praising the one who ordains them. It's so good, man. How in this film it feels a little for Pixar like the expressions and movements are larger and less controlled is something I really enjoy as well. Like the "you are a toy," like what even is this movement? You're not really getting as many minute hints at emotions here. You're not able to do a whole sequence where a guy just looks at a slip of paper and cries one little tear. You're getting Woody absolutely flailing about because he's a ragdoll and everything moving is really clear. You're getting huge eyes and overcranked mouths and facial work. It can feel a little uncanny and big, and thanks to the aspect ratio, even aggressive when things get right up to the frame. But it all feels in line with the production designs and sets and makes it, again, aids that spooky feeling. It leads to some classic, like, exaggerated expressions sometimes, and a world that feels very close to the surface. Like I mentioned with Finding Dory and Nemo, getting a sense of scale is really crucial to selling the atmosphere of these films to me with characters that are small. And given that Toy Story is in such familiar settings, conveying scale is something it sells at almost every moment. A little story in a big world emphasizes the story stakes. It feels so large and important. So the world around the toys feels even more enormous. The opening sneak mission to spy on the opening of presents feels like a genuine trek out into the wilderness because it's framed so importantly on these tiny little guys. The truck pulling into the Dinoco, that horn, ugh. Toy Story has atmosphere for days. Pizza Planet, I feel like I've been there before. The location choices are really fascinating and is consistently one of my favorite things about the Toy Story series. It's something they do so well. The places they go and getting an inventive new perspective on something so everyday that it feels obvious. How they reimagine ordinary places into this larger than life obstacle course and stage for smaller things, making massive moments of spectacle out of ordinary things and places, like the two windows between two neighboring houses, the inside of a claw machine, getting through an automatic door, the back of a ute, making a toolbox, even one with a Tim Allen Home Improvement reference on it, feel that heavy is inspiring. These everyday places are given so much meaning through this chosen scope, storytelling lens, and atmospheric power. It sets the stage for Pixar's still one of their toothier narratives. While Toy Story wasn't an independent film, it was coming from a studio with far less refinement in a kind of different landscape, and so while it's fairly straightforward, it's equal parts edgier and scarier and less reserved than Pixar can be today, which makes it very valuable. They didn't really make a film quite like this one again. I've spoken about how some of their films like Monsters University, Cars 2, or Onward can occasionally come across as being too nice. Their thematics can ring a little hollow by feeling as though they're trying to please everybody or lacking weight because of it. Leave every character at a zero sum in terms of how people have been hurt or mistakes they've each made. At worst, it can feel like it's underestimating the audience. But trusting an audience with respect, I feel, including children, means trusting them to be able to handle the meatier elements or methods of presentation. Toy Story is the best example of that for Pixar consistently. It's their scariest series and it's probably their most thematically mature consistently. Dealing with threads of jealousy, malice, control, fear, and friendship in equal doses, Toy Story isn't afraid to show the toys being like willfully angry and mean to each other, the chaos of a large group. It leaves its central tension unresolved for the majority of the film. And while it could have felt like an enemies to friends type story of Woody and Buzz getting to know each other slowly and being like, hey, I was wrong about you. To me, it feels more mature because it's about their individual development. They each reach their moments of character growth in natural ways by themselves, which somehow feels more lifelike and true to character. The problem wasn't that they didn't like each other, it's that they had their own problem getting in the way of the friendship, which helps the film become about larger things as well. Both of the heroes are humbled and that learn that they aren't better than each other, but it's not the other person who teaches them that, which to me feels way more real. Buzz Lightyear's whole arc is still really fun and interesting to watch play out. While every performer nailed their roles, I do think it's probably Tim Allen who makes the movie like that much better. Buzz has something so innocent and childlike about him, but that like smooth, professional sheen makes his layer of ignorance so charming. It makes room for all the tension and hilarity of the rest of the film. Yes, Buzz is a himbo. He's absolutely a himbo.
I had enough tea for today. Let's get you out of here, Buzz.
Don't you get it? You see the hat? I am Mrs. Nesbit!
Behind the scenes, and this is very well known so I won't go too much into it, in early drafts and storyboards for Toy Story, thanks to notes from Disney apparently, Woody was originally an even nastier guy, doing things like intentionally hitting Buzz out of the window and then ordering everyone else in line. There's a fully voiced scene of that giving a glimpse into this kind of really mean-spirited and unlikable direction that the film was originally taking him in. The film we see today certainly isn't anywhere near that, but that spark of anger and jealousy and character acting in a plainly selfish, ego-driven way is still there. It somehow lands in this really difficult place of wishing Woody would make better choices rather than disliking him for doing it. It's a really difficult characterization to land, and I think they nailed it. Somehow I feel my age gives me a way to have appreciated the film in both kinds of ways on this front. As a kid, maybe I didn't notice how Woody was a bit brash because I hadn't seen the alternative, this place where characters have all of their round edges. The landscape of films like it was so much less occupied when I was growing up, so it seemed totally normal and fine that there would be on-screen arguments and tension that lasted a full hour unresolved. Now as an adult, I can see how this has changed and how this film feels more and more rare. I can enjoy that edgier side of Toy Story knowing full well how little of this energy is really explored in these films anymore, and still feel like the film is made in many respects for me and the demographic I still occupy. Like it was made by the world of animated films surrounding it that this one would grow up with me. Watching the film today, for a few moments it was strange to feel as though Woody kind of isn't a likable guy in a lot of ways, but I still gravitate toward him. Is it Tom Hanks' performance? I certainly have a very soft spot for him as an actor, but I do think it's also worth noting that Woody is actually one of the few humanoids of the crew until Buzz shows up, so he's easier to project onto, and Mr. Potato Head is also noticeably more aggressive than he is. It's also important that some of the adult jokes can come really early in the film, which is probably on purpose. For the time, reassuring the adults in the room that the film is going to be intelligent and worthwhile, especially to subvert the surface level marketing and the impression that might give you, is a really important thing to convey right away. On this, the idea of a joke that only an adult would get, I'm sure many folks would immediately assume the joke would be sexual or risque in nature, since kids don't know that stuff yet. DreamWorks certainly subscribed to that to a level my younger self found uncomfortable once I figured out a little bit of what was going on. But Toy Story has this other way of telling jokes that only adults would get because they're mostly just smart. So when I started understanding them, I found them even funnier. I'm talking about the
Hey, Ham, look, I'm Picasso.
I don't get it.
You uncultured swine.
Tuesday night's plastic corrosion awareness meeting was, I think, a big success, and we want to thank Mr. Spell for putting that on for us. Thank you, Mr. Spell.
You're welcome.
Excuse me, I think the word you're searching for is Space Ranger.
The word I'm searching for, I can't say, because there's preschool toys present.
That's what I'm talking about. It's perfectly aimed. Even if they're not laugh out loud jokes, these three like offhand script moments work really early in the film to reassure a parent or an adult that there's a difference between a kid's film and all ages entertainment, and this is clearly the latter. Pixar's sentimentality isn't quite as refined here as well, so the moments like Woody's confession to Buzz about his jealousy, how it's been guiding his actions, feels really genuine and grounded in the film too. And way less like played up, it's a very simply shot moment. To this, I feel that while the opening act is of course great, once the two of them arrive at Pizza Planet, from there onward the film enters a class very much all its own. With fewer speaking characters, especially with Sid's crew being silent, the dynamic between Woody and Buzz and the shadow of Sid over everything helps the film really laser focus in and gets next level enjoyable. This is aided by the more frightening atmosphere as well, a more natural feeling pace from here on, created by something of an inversion of the two homes of the two kids across the two two halves of the film as well. We start on that really open, safe, neat depiction of Andy's entire house basically. While there's the mission to spy on the presents, it still feels as though, because of the opening credit sequence, like the toys have access to the world around them. Free reign inside Andy's safe bedroom, which is a haven of friendship and bright decoration. Once Woody and Buzz are locked into Sid's room, that feeling is turned on its head. The room is threadbare, stark, dark, the concentrated point of horror, while the house around you is a complete mystery and totally inaccessible. It's such a neat and clever way to create an atmospheric shift by simply inverting the things that you've already shown the audience. The things you wanted in Andy's place are the things you don't want with Sid. The last thing you want to be is being played with. The last place you want to be is on the bed in his center of attention. Andy's window was what Buzz was knocked out of by Woody, and Sid's window becomes the place where Woody himself sought an escape, which is denied him. These inversions are really subtle but really clever, and give the film that smaller feeling, like an indie production, which is definitely almost non-existent in their work today, which is almost always traveling to new locations for each and every scene. Further to that, one of my favorite moments in the whole movie, one of my favorite moments in Pixar in general, is the difference shown between Andy's mum and Sid's dad. It's so fucking classy. The terrifying dog thing is loud and is chasing Buzz all around. The tension ramps up, but as soon as the dog catches even a glimpse of the dad sleeping in the chair with a beer in his hand, just immediately turns away and leaves. Linking that to Sid's destructive, loud behavior, going out late at night by himself, fighting with the sister and screaming at his mum who is nowhere to be found. The way such a full family dynamic settles in place so quickly with such a quiet moment has always struck me as really, really masterful. The dog doesn't want to go near him. It's like a final puzzle piece that just completely changes that entire house once you slot it in. In terms of issues that I have with the film, there's really just one, and it's something I mentioned when I covered Cars, and it might be a holdover from how Disney films proper were primarily musicals, but given that no other Pixar director has these moments of relying so heavily on contemporary songs to give voice to their characters' inner thoughts, it's also just as likely that director John Lasseter just likes when occasionally the film just straight up has a song in it. I am your pal and also friend. We are best pals and best friends. When you don't know how to fucking drive, I get out the Melways to tell you where to go. Now, I really do love the old musical adage of when the emotion is too big to say, you sing, and when it's too big to sing, you dance. And occasionally Pixar have kept to that. In Toy Story, Randy Newman is our Broadway diva for our on and off musical here. It's to assist with the montage, right? Like Andy playing with Woody at the start is to the legendary "You've Got a Friend in Me," and sets this warm, light-hearted tone. It's a beautiful song, holds a special place in the hearts of many, and is really wonderful in this film here. Later we have the Strange Things montage.
Like, dumb, I'm smart, and I want respect!
Where we see that Andy is starting to favor Buzz over Woody, and we get a look at how Woody is both jealous and sad about how things are going for him. It really helps us understand the direction the character is headed in a brief way, and why he begins acting the way he does later, but still, it's not a terrific song, and coming at the transition point between the first and second act, I do feel as a somewhat jarring change in momentum. Then there's the shift from Act 2 to Act 3, which features Randy Newman singing again, this time the "Why the fuck am I on a canoe? I forgot my life jacket in the car." Obviously, it's sad as shit and a super important moment for Buzz's progression, but even as a kid, I don't think you need a song here. If the scene is silent or just has like sound effects and a score, and he just acts it out, like he's just doing the things, like it's shorter for one, it's less melodramatic, and I honestly think is debatably more powerful without the song here. I can see why some people would disagree, but when the film has seemingly used Randy's voice as a lens into Woody's inner thoughts in both prior circumstances, hearing the same voice sing for Buzz and then only just reinforce already strong visuals has always just felt a little redundant or heavy-handed to me. I don't really love the song in this scene, but really, it doesn't make a blemish on what is still a benchmark for animated films even 30 years later. It's tough to talk about a legendary film like this and say anything new, but of all the many purposes I have behind making this series of videos, perhaps among the most selfish is that I might be able to shake someone awake to how truly remarkable Toy Story is in all aspects. I get 4 shots at it because I do still feel like I've failed to see Toy Story brought up in the conversations where I feel it really does deserve to be situated, and I think we all know exactly why, because it's Toy Story. It goes without saying. It's so accepted into the cultural zeitgeist of the world I live in, at least, that it just kind of blends in. It maybe doesn't have the world building and radical appeal of something like a How to Train Your Dragon or a Kung Fu Panda. It doesn't have the style or energy of a Spider-Verse. It's very rarely the one that I think people say when I ask which Pixar film is their favorite, and believe me, I ask everyone. Because it's Toy Story. It's the ground beneath your feet. It's hard to pay attention to the foundation of the house. But it walked so everyone else could try to keep up with its confident, surprisingly gargantuan stride. I'm not going to say that Toy Story walked so other movies could run, because it carved out a place in the world for itself so indelible that even if I wouldn't choose to watch it as an adult for any individual element, like this is not my style. It's bright, and there's the little toys, and there's green and pink, and you know what? How does this speak to me? So like, I don't understand how this speaks to me so fully, but it's just because the master craft that it exhibits each and every single fucking time is undeniable. Toy Story walked so everyone else could crawl, so that it might eventually have a running buddy who could just go a couple of rounds with it. I debated it, but I think I am going to do a full recap of Toy Story 4 for those of you who haven't seen this movie. Oftentimes when speaking to friends or family, when Toy Story 4 comes up, I have championed it. I have assured folks that it's absolutely worth the watch, and I will personally go out on a limb and let anybody know who hasn't given it a chance that it's really, really good and I love it a lot. And if what it takes is me telling you what happens in the story to get that point across so you actually go and watch it, so be it. You're already here. We begin on a revisit of a time gone by. The moments where Woody, Jesse, Bo Peep, Buzz, and the whole gang rescue RC from a storm about to wash him away from being left outside in the driveway. This moment of showing how far the toys will go to ensure that they stick together and nobody is left behind is thrown into a heart-wrenching moment of goodbye when the toys discover that Bo Peep and her lamp has been given away and is now being taken by another family. Briefly considering going with her, Woody is momentarily torn between his duty to Andy and his desires before leaving Bo Peep to her future, possibly to never see her again. Years later, the gang are all happily living with Bonnie and her family after having been gifted to her by Andy at the end of Toy Story 3. But despite having found a new space, it just seems Woody isn't one of the toys that Bonnie really needs the most. Having trouble adjusting to his new life and fretting about Bonnie's adventures into kindergarten out of an overgrown sense of duty, Woody sneaks along inside her backpack to her first day of kindergarten. In a moment of seeing her loneliness and fear, he acts quickly, giving some crafting materials to Bonnie, who uses them to create a new toy, Forky, who comes to life. This idea of trash being made sentient puts Woody to the test, as Forky, who Bonnie immediately loves, wants to throw himself in the bin where he thinks he belongs, insert late millennial self-esteem joke here, while Woody tries to keep him safe and around Bonnie while she and her family venture on a holiday road trip with the toys ahead of her new kindergarten life. Forky ends up leaping from the RV, and when Woody follows him to bring him back, he speaks about the value of being a toy and helping a kid when they need it, his own history with Andy, something he clearly hasn't really let go of. When he and Forky arrive at the carnival where the RV is parked, Woody catches a glimpse of Bo Peep's lamp in an old antique store called Second Chance Antiques and goes in to find her. He and Forky run into Gabby Gabby, an old 50s doll wanting to achieve aesthetic perfection so a child would love her, and her entourage of Goosebumps, who is looking for a voice box to replace her own faulty one, and Woody's seems like it might work. Not wanting to be torn open, obviously, he escapes the antique store, but Forky is captured. Woody obviously wants to get Forky back for Bonnie, but he's missing, so while Buzz goes forth into the carnival to look for him, Woody finds himself reunited with Bo Peep, who's been a lost toy traveling with the carnival for about 6 years, totally happy about it. She decides to help Woody get Forky back, and with the help of Bo Peep, Buzz, a couple of other fluff prizes from the show, a Canadian stuntman toy named Duke Kaboom, Woody hatches a plan to retrieve Forky from Second Chance Antiques before Bonnie and her family leave. After trying their best though, they're still unable to get the job done, and in a moment where they barely escape with their parts intact, Bo Peep tells Woody that nobody is with him and to give up, basically, and he exclaims that saving Forky and getting him back to Bonnie is all he feels he has left to do. Purposeless, he goes back to Second Chance Antiques and hands over his voice box to Gabby Gabby willingly in exchange for Forky, understanding her desire to make a child happy in a way he feels he's already achieved and maybe isn't even his calling anymore. After all this time though, Gabby Gabby is still rejected by the kid she thought would want her, and in a mad dash to get back to Bonnie's RV in time, she ends up helping another lost child and finally finds her opportunity to make a child happy. After the toys still on board the RV basically commandeer the vehicle to retrieve Woody, Buzz, and Forky from the very middle of the carnival, Woody is confronted with the same choice that he faced those many years ago. His duty or his desires. Does he stay with Bo Peep or does he stay with Bonnie? Buzz reassures him that Bonnie will be okay, and so Woody chooses to stay with Bo Peep, become a lost toy, and start a new chapter of his life. Alright, where do I start with this one? I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I like Toy Story 4 this much, because I kind of am. I didn't expect it. I didn't ask for this at all. Come on, you think I wanted to lay praises at the feet of this? I didn't want to criticize Wall-E the same way I don't want to have to be a contrarian here either. And I'm sorry, I don't want to have to put takes out there that people won't like, but god damn it, I love Toy Story 4 so much that it makes me want to explode. From here on up in my rankings, I get like this certain feeling for these films. You can hear it in my voice right now. It's like when I'm watching, I'm just constantly squirming with this feeling of like, oh man, I just love that I'm sitting here watching this. Movie magic. I don't really feel that for Toy Story 1, but I do for Toy Story 4, and I'm sorry. It seems impossible to discuss Toy Story 4 without bookending this discussion we've been having about Pixar's prestige, because at least in the commentary and opinion space, Toy Story 4 is kind of the centerpiece or catalyst of an ongoing talk about how Pixar has fallen behind in recent years in the animation space. It made $1 billion, but given that it continued the Toy Story series after most people had considered it finished, meant that it's kind of seen as a cash grab a lot because Pixar couldn't let their darling sleeping dog lie and needed that moolah. It's all tied up with people's misunderstandings of what like artistic integrity is, and it's apparently because of a decision like this that Disney and Pixar are now being embarrassed by the competition of DreamWorks and Illumination and Sony with films like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish and the Spider-Verse series, movies that have reinvigorated the animation landscape of films with a style that's decidedly un-Disneyfied. Toy Story 4 is the starting point for a lot of conversations about mass layoffs at the company, of even studio veterans, or how personnel from Pixar are moving to other studios more and more frequently to make projects that are more creative. Even Josh Cooley, the director of this film, is directing the upcoming Transformers 1 movie. Now, keep in mind, I'm just relaying the conversation. I don't necessarily believe in this. I do think that while movies like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is fucking fantastic, I'm really looking forward to like The Wild Robot. I don't necessarily believe that Luca or Lightyear or something is less creative because Spider-Verse has a much louder visual style and a sound mix that I can't fucking understand. I don't think that's a given, and I think whole cloth claiming that Spider-Verse or films like it, like TMNT Mutant Mayhem, are quote-unquote more creative than Pixar without substantive writing on why and how is reductive and simplistic. I've seen even like me lumping in Spider-Verse with TMNT Mutant Mayhem is a reduction on both of their styles. They are each going for something extraordinarily different. TMNT is trying to look like the entire movie was drawn by a teenager, and Spider-Verse is not trying to do that same thing, but you know, most people just lump them in together because it's easier to talk about them like that. And there might be a glimpse into how simplified people are trying to make this discussion. Either it looks like Disney or it looks like Spider-Verse. Those are the only two camps. It's not true. There's a lot more nuance to this than you might think. I love the different styles that we're getting now. I'm just saying there's a bit more competition that Pixar have right now, and there's a lot of talk in conversation around that at the moment. Toy Story 4 is one of these centerpieces, and Lightyear to some extent as well, in this conversation, that Pixar have apparently fallen behind and are really stinky now that your boy Spider-Man is in town, smacking them around with the colors and the stepped animation and the watercolors and the experiences that people aren't tired of. The idea that Pixar are out of ideas and are playing it too safe, I will say, is not entirely without merit. They do have a few too many stories about families at this point. They absolutely could afford to go more fantastical, break from the reality flavor they seem very tied to, and their genre lens has definitely narrowed at times. However, there's something to the idea of how their history is coming back to bite them here, and maybe Pixar just don't expect to be the only animation studio that a person will watch. Maybe they just know where they fit in. It's a big conversation that spans out into larger opinions about Western feature-length animation space in general, which might not seem like the point today, and it isn't. I'm sure I'll talk more about this on like my thoughts on Pixar in general when this series finally concludes. But I'll just say this for now, real direct, so the folks in the back can understand. Forgive me if I'm wrong here. I do think Pixar's golden age, where they were at the top of their game, kind of depended on nobody else being able to produce films which could compete on their level stylistically, which is no longer the case and hasn't been for quite a long time. If you wanted to make high quality animated films which threw out the idea of celebrity casting, flavor of the week premises, and unremarkable visual stylings, they were the only place you could go. Not even Disney were doing it, in my humble opinion. Maybe I'll frame it like, I think until maybe the mid-2010s, films I saw by Blue Sky Studios or DreamWorks or Disney that were 3D animated felt like Pixar light. They felt like films Pixar could have made but just didn't. Studios around them were following in their wake because it's what was working, but they kind of weren't really offering something that Pixar wasn't already doing better. Pixar could have made Meet the Robinsons, but Disney couldn't make The Incredibles. Know what I mean? Maybe in a writing sense they were separating themselves with different humor styles and different celebrities, but stylistically, visually, these studios were not offering anything substantially different. They were also in the box office competing against mid-budget films a lot of the time, which don't exist anymore. Do you want to go see Good Will Hunting or Toy Story 2 today? Because Good Will Hunting cost less than one episode of The Mandalorian. There are more animation studios with their own styles now on this level, and the way people consume and discuss films has also changed. On one hand, yeah, maybe Pixar have fallen off and they're no longer as prestigious as they used to be and they don't make good movies, but maybe people just fucking love complaining. Now, instead of Pixar being the only studio who are able to produce this kind of film consistently, there are now more great movies coming from more studios. But the entire feeling, the entire sense of Pixar's prestige, that exclusive special aura of a new Pixar movie, I think is deeply tied to a time when they were alone and unchallenged, and that's what's coming back to bite them now. Wanting Pixar to go back to the old days, though, doesn't just involve them, it involves asking every other animation studio around them to stop and return to a hierarchy of a film industry that doesn't exist anymore. Their prestige is kind of an idea, I think, that they should be the lone single studio on top of the game, untouchable in their output, but that is not a norm that I think I want to champion for the industry to return to. We should instead be rejoicing that there are more studios able to express more styles now and appreciate Pixar for the niche that they still occupy, because they still do it better than anyone else. They still make their movies better than anyone. It's just maybe a little harder to see now because everyone fucking figured it out and now they're trying something different. It means we get more movies and more risk taking from everyone. No, I don't think Pixar could have made Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. I also don't think they wanted to. I like that I can have both, right? What do we do now that there's more around, and why would I blame Pixar for that? They carried everyone behind them, and now that they stand shoulder to shoulder with some competition, it doesn't mean that they fell off. It doesn't somehow mean that there being a Toy Story 4 magically redacts all of the artistry present in the studio. It means they wanted to make a Toy Story 4. It means everybody else caught up, and I'm perplexed as to why I should think that that's a bad thing. Yes, they have a brand, they have habits, they have their niche, and they would do well to move out of it a little sooner than they have, but if someone actually thinks the movies they make on average today are worse than what they made 20 years ago and doesn't agree that Pixar's sense of prestige is largely due to the film industry changing around them, I don't think they're paying any attention at all. But perhaps that still begs the question, was Toy Story 4 a cash grab? Now, I think the term is somewhat coarse, but if by cash grab you mean an extremely high effort product produced over a period of years which was informed likely equally by as much market research and as many focus groups as it was artistry and technology, then yes, of course it was. Of course it was a film made because it would likely make a lot of money, and it happened to make a shit ton of money. It's also true that every single film I've spoken about in this aside was also informed by as much market research as they were by focus groups, as they were by artistry and technology, and were funded and made because they would likely make an awful lot of money. Did Spider-Verse absolutely reinvigorate the animation landscape and make way for a new wave of stepped, stylized animated films and shows? Absolutely it did. But it's still a Spider-Man movie. TMNT is still a very known, very popular, quite old brand. Puss in Boots is a household name. There is no such thing as pure artistry when you start putting this many zeros on the check. And I'm sorry if that's a newsflash. I'm sorry if it hurts to hear that every single Pixar film is made because it's likely going to make a lot of money. I'm sorry if it hurts on a personal level because Toy Story 3 meant so much, but you might just have to deal with it. A studio is not your friend. These are products. There being another Toy Story film doesn't really change the first 3 at all. That's kind of in your head. I just hope that it's okay that if I'm going to spend my money on something, I'd rather it be on another Toy Story film from a studio like Pixar, who I know, even if they don't want to make it, they're going to put in as much effort as they can to make it a great fucking movie that's worth my money. I know that. They're going to do it because they're professionals and they don't make bad movies. They never have. Was Toy Story 4 a cash grab? Will Toy Story 5 be a cash grab? Would Incredibles 3 be a cash grab? Of course. Nobody's deluded about that. But the fact that people want to spend their money on it doesn't invalidate its status as art. Doesn't mean it isn't worth paying for. I want to see Incredibles 3. I want to see Toy Story 5. Doesn't mean it's not going to be a good movie. Life is very, very hard sometimes. And if you're offering me Toy Story, I'm going to take it. I'm just going to take it. Even if I didn't think it was necessary before I watched the film, my feelings now are completely in the other direction. I love this movie. But I also think it's a film that did take a lot of risks that have largely gone unrecognized. And furthermore, the very platform of it being unnecessary is something the film really feels centrally aware of. Now, as an adult, as a guy who grew up during a time of media upheaval on every front, there are particular stories that I'm vulnerable to, like certain locations or certain themes that I'm just always going to go to. Growing up as a writer, stories were a part of my lifeblood since before I knew how to talk, and after studying narrative and storytelling for the rest of my life after the fact, occasionally there's a character bleed. How much I love stories makes its way into what I expect my life to be. I want my life to be a good story. I know I'm not the only one who feels some kind of learned disappointment that life itself isn't not only not like a story in how it plays out, it's also just far longer. You might reach a moment in your existence that feels like a climactic point, the end to a plot or story, but then it just keeps going. How do you pick up the tone from there? Where's your character gonna go now? Life isn't a story, it's not the Truman Show, but it's so easy to forget that and want to divide your life up into retrospective chunks or arcs. Like my high school arc, my college arc was the 4th sequel. It's one thing to know that life doesn't revolve around you, to know you're not the main character of anything, but another to come to understand what that really means deep in your bones if you've been surrounded by storytelling as you've grown up. It's not a fault, it's a natural internalization of media culture. Because even when huge life events do occur, even when enormous big things affect you and draw enormous lines straight through your identity, you have that moment of resolution maybe and that breath out, like you've been taught every story needs, but there's still more life. The biggest difference between stories and life is that in life, the story doesn't stop where it's supposed to. So it's not an accident that Woody's struggling to find meaning here, lost where he is after his story has ended. It's not an accident that he really struggles to move his life into a different lane than the one he's used to, even though he really wants to. That fear of change, because he might feel guilt for leaving some people behind, is enormous. Recognizing and letting go of that feeling of duty and purpose that he's been so tied to in order to be happy as himself now, that there's a real opportunity to be somewhere new. He's past the point where anybody's asking something of him and needs to learn to start asking new things of himself. What do the parents do when the kids are out of home and they're not coming back? His responsibility is kind of gone, and there's a major reassessment of identity that needs to happen there. The story hasn't ended where it was supposed to. It's not an accident that the film grapples directly with the space following a life well lived, and it's not a mistake to make a movie about it. It's unspeakably necessary. If Toy Story 1, 2, and 3 were films that I grew up with, I reckon I trust Pixar not to throw that away. This is also a film I can find something in as the adult I am now, and it's about that very emptiness of there just being more life than you thought you'd get. Now, obviously the film has taken some threads that Toy Story 3 tied up and left them where they were in the name of making a more intimate film. It very much focuses on Woody and Bo Peep and leaves some previous mainstays like Ham, Slinky, and the Potato Heads in the periphery in the background. It feels like it's resisted the urge to just put them in there for the sake of it. It's only including the players that it absolutely has to tell this particular story. Now, whether that's because the actors had passed away, like Don Rickles with Mr. Potato Head, I think there's a considered effort here to only turn over the stones that they absolutely have to for this particular story. I'd personally have loved more Jesse, but Toy Story 3 was very much a conclusion to the whole gang's time with Andy, and now this film is about Woody after that, so it's necessarily of a very different tone, dealing with much lower stakes and feels like far less of an event than 3. When I get to talking about 3, I'll delve into that. But Toy Story 4 isn't trying to be as big or as bold as its predecessors, and I think it's because the team knew that to go more intimate was the right move here. In that light, Toy Story 4 is not immediately apparent. It's not immediately obvious, and I certainly didn't twig to why I enjoyed it so much beyond a surface level right away. It took me a few seconds to actually understand that, contrary to what I and everybody else had said that it should have finished at 3, that to keep going and find something new was the most Toy Story thing that it could do. Discardment, childhood being over, leaving it behind, dealing with the aftermath and starting again. It's not alien to the series, it's pretty familiar, and certainly now I feel like not only is Toy Story 4 a necessary film, but if I had to pin the film responsible for my adulthood love of Pixar as a whole, the reason that I'm doing all these videos, the reason why I say that I love Pixar now, it's this one, because it's not perfect by a long shot, but I love it all the same. I love it more each and every time I go around because it proved me wrong. It proved to me what every creative person already knows, that a consumer doesn't fucking know what they want, and they're never going to be satisfied when they get what they think they want. They're going to complain about too many sequels, whether it's real or not. Just make the thing that's true. Sure, I grew up with Pixar, and I guess I was always a fan to some extent, but I realized just how much I love their work when I first watched this film. I was proven wrong. I could not believe my eyes. And each and every time I sit down with it, I'm overcome with this whimsy, this letting go, this real innocent childlike awe that so little can really reach for me these days. I can barely handle how much feeling I feel when Toy Story 4 is in the room. I just have a lot of time for Toy Story 4. Of most Pixar entries, I find it among the most rewatchable. Find myself watching it more and more frequently today than almost any other film they've produced. Actually, when I bought my PlayStation 5, the guy at the store was like, "Oh, what are you going to play first?" I looked him dead in the eye and I said, Toy Story 4 in 4K. It strikes this really wonderful balance of sentimentality, humor, adventure, drama, wit, just plain fun. That's just really comfortable and nice to sit down with, but there's also tension and love there too. Toy Story 3 is kind of a heavy, tense watch. I find the suspense here aims for a really palatable spot that's digestible whilst also being engaging and dramatic, and saves the emotion for where it's at its most powerful. There's a handful of really, really awesome moments that I will never get over. Bo Peep and Woody finding each other again while frozen in toy form, just beautiful. Because Bo Peep's not really in the first 3 films all that much, I didn't really know what to think of this the first time, but then where she goes in the story after that, rewatching this moment, oh my god, I do not have the words for it. Woody actually giving up his voice box to someone who needed it more? What a glorious plot development. And his arc exploding on the "it's all I have left to do." Tom Hanks always kills it as this character, and for sure you can hear some of his age in this performance, but that spark has never been so raw or close to the surface, and I love how the character was developed in this film. The Key and Peele fluff characters don't always land, but when they do, they really do. Forky as a concept, I think, can be kind of allegory for Pixar's movies. Woody is Pixar, Forky is a movie, Bonnie is a consumer. Pixar put the pieces on the table, but it was Bonnie who put them together and gave them meaning. You give meaning to the things that help you, whether they're cobbled together or not. You make your own meaning from these pieces. Again, the problems I have are mostly with how convoluted things get toward the back end of the film. The story with Bonnie and her parents feels a bit clunky and inconvenient at times. The family don't really interact with the carnival themselves at all, so for about half the film, the toys are trying to delay the parents from leaving, and I think that bit runs itself dry. It also diminishes the feeling of humans in the world a bit, that the toys are so openly messing with Bonnie's parents. Instead of them feeling like imposing or powerful like they had a few films ago, Bonnie's parents can kind of just be in the way of the story because the film needs them to do a bunch of stuff, but doesn't really tell us anything about them or have us invest in them at all. If the carnival hadn't have been a stopover on a larger trip and had actually been the destination, or the parents were more full characters themselves, maybe that clunky feeling is a bit resolved. But what I love about Toy Story 4 more than outweighs it, I love Duke Kaboom. I think Keanu killed it. Just hysterical. I do also really feel this is probably the most beautiful looking film Pixar have made, if not their finest work to date. It's the first Toy Story in a widescreen ratio and uses radically different lenses, but there's also been a significant shift in the textures used for toys, the lighting style, the color palette being a bit more realistic. The materials and the way toys move is so distinct. Woody is that rag doll, but ventriloquist dolls have these loose aspects to be even more pronounced versions of that. Buzz is this premium plastic action figure, again, who's always had the snap to him, but when Duke Kaboom comes onto the scene, he's got that same quality, but in a cheaper, less articulated body. His story of the bike's jump not measuring up to the commercial is hysterical and very true to life as well. Truly, the sense of perspective and size and scale of the toys has never been stronger than it is in this movie. The way it's shot so close and small, but does such an incredible job of blowing out the backgrounds, no matter what they are, into these large bokeh-filled landscapes that have so much depth and shade, introducing characters that are even smaller than Woody and working really hard to, like always, shoot the world from a toy's point of view, brings it into this new place where I feel as though the world is big but not exaggerated, and it helps the toys stand out even more, especially in moments like on top of the merry-go-round where the scale is really brought to the forefront. I've talked about believability as relevant to Brad Bird films. I've never believed the visuals in a Pixar movie more than I have for Toy Story 4. The secret sauce is that lighting, right? Those blowout spots, man, love that shit. The film actually had two directors of photography, Patrick Lynn, who was responsible for the character blocking and composition of each shot, and Jean-Claude Calanche headed up the team entirely devoted to lighting. The scale of the carnival might seem daunting for a lighting team, and surely it was, calibrating every single bulb individually and treating the indoor environments as one might light a live action set. The entire carnival feels like a living organism. This allowed the shooting of the film to essentially set exposure levels depending on night or day, and then the set almost does all of the work for you. It's about which of the internal lights you have to switch off, and not the ones you're adding to it. The effect is almost frighteningly real and feels stunningly accurate to real life. Surely it's emphasized. More than half the VFX budget was used on just the rain research for that opening sequence, and it's like exaggerated. Those raindrops are huge, but the effect is well worth it. As I mentioned, like sunbeam spots blow out the camera. That's an effect of an extremely wide dynamic range, like it's been shot with a real camera set to an indoor exposure which is darker. The antique store is actually made of 12 different sets and somewhere in the range of 10,000 individual props across 8,000 square feet of retail space. The labyrinthian construction is able to house scenes of a great many tones and feelings, therefore, from exciting to love and awe, graduate from trepidation to menace in just a single scene. Simulated cloth and material which has been aged and detailed realistically, small imperfections in the props, it all feels so real, almost too exact to real life to be possible. Wood grain textures, man, I don't understand how all of this is possible. But the real killer element has absolutely got to be the production design. The way the locations are absolutely bursting with detail. The little off to the side spot of brush where Woody and Bo first talk, it's lush and natural but stages their interaction perfectly whilst feeling like a believable place. The rain on the driveway, the way the light reflects off the droplets and how the soft, diffused bedroom ambience glows out into the looming nighttime. The antique store? Get the fuck out of here with the shelves and the cobwebs and the cat and the old refracted colored lighting, the tops of the cabinets with all the chandeliers behind the forgotten decorations, how it really feels like a place that's slowly become more and more cramped and filled over the decades, but it's still so easy to read and stages so many different scenes throughout the film in these little nooks and crannies. How well the antique store echoes the themes of both temperance and age is so meaningful for the film. The traveling carnival, a place of joy but also fleeting temperance, is implied from the outside. Ducky and Bunny feel like temporary cheap toys, but the antique store contrasts that with age and being stuck in the past. There's a concentration of these disposable toys and old ideas, even an appearance from Pixar's first ever character, Tin Toy, which helps put these two clashing ideas in one place of fleeting joy and being stuck, epitomized by Gabby and Forky taking refuge in a china display with some of the most precious artifacts you can find in the building. If the film is in part to speak to how worth and value is what you make of it, the visual of a plastic fork with some googly eyes and pipe cleaner sitting next to a beautiful tea set and a vintage doll that's still broken and all having the same chance to make someone happy, that idea is really beautiful to me. Gabby is working on her aesthetic beauty and her like voice box and stuff, yet she ties her sense of self-worth to what Harmony, this kid that looks like the kid in the book she's based on, might think of her. She wants to be there for her child, yet her reasons are still tangled up in this selfish version of it, of like, oh, I'll finally be good enough if this other person likes me. You can tell her loathing is self-directed since she doesn't really judge other people that same way. But Forky, a literal spork with some pipe cleaner and glue, the opposite of a aesthetic perfection is able to comfort her and is just as valuable to a child. I really just love that imagery and love how that's kind of just left unspoken. That said, I want to draw attention to this lovely little touch with Gabby across the film in her sense of eye control. In her first scene, she's got that distant look, and the physics of her eyes mean that they bob up and down when she moves them. Like they move a little after her head stops. It's really disconcerting. But over each scene and appearance, she seems to gain more and more precise control over her eyes until she's no longer as off-putting. So it's a way to make the design both really creepy at the start of the film, but then just with one little trick, slowly move that exact same design to elicit a completely different feeling. It's incredibly intelligent. And I mean, the interior of a pinball machine is a bar, exposed wires on the inside, the lights above becoming the vibe for underneath. This was the moment on my first watch. I just stopped and was like, what am I looking at? I've never seen anything like this. This friggin' powerboard? Coated in dust? My grandma has 9 of those. This split diopter shit? Come on. Goddamn incredible work is done here to make every location, which each works so well within the story, an absolute joy to watch for every single second. From a visual perspective, this isn't just my favorite work Pixar have done, it's straight up among my favorite films to look at of any I've ever seen. I adore the way it's animated, shot, and designed. Woody breaking down out the back of the antique store next to a pile of trash? Symbolism, bro! I think the way the film punches up Bo Peep as a character is one of its biggest successes, both visually and from a writing standpoint. Now, she didn't have a lot of screen time or really depth in the first 2 films where she appeared, yet this version of her does feel like that same character who's simply gone through her own journey in the time between films. It's really hard to do. Being introduced to her within Molly's room at the start of the film is great, helps color her as kind of the leader of Molly's crew, and her redesign later is classy as hell. She's got that same sense of grace and poise contrasted with this very individualistic outlook, which from the little that she says in the first 2 films is still very much a part of her. Her agency and capability within the story is great, her resourcefulness and being so prepared for any eventuality with these little repurposed gizmos. She's maintained her sense of femininity too, and her being able to use her old dress as either a skirt or a cape is a really cool touch. It's a tough thing to have basically reinvented the character like this when she was in such a small box before. I didn't know what to expect and didn't think much of her before I saw the film, but can confidently say she's absolutely one of my favorite Toy Story characters now. She just makes me smile, man. And I think the love story between her and Woody is really sweet. I met her in London one time too. It was super cool. I think Annie Potts does a terrific job as her voice as well, on top of so much of the voice acting in this entire film just being so delightful. So many great takes, man. Just really great choices. Little touches of performances that add so much humanity to the little lines.
But he gave us to Bonnie? Oh, she's
You have a little girl.
Who knew you were such a softie?
Why are you so bad at driving? You got 6 eyes.
Pear?
Have you ever played hide and seek?
No, but it sounds complicated.
Oh, have you seen Duke? Hey, on your back.
It was the happiest Boxing Day of my life.
Bye, Gabby. Goodbye, Benson. He is terrifying.
Yes, this film is also very funny. Speaking of characters, this again reminds me of one of my favorite characteristics of Woody, that being his sense of staunchness about his decisions, which is a really big player in the plot here. Yeah, he makes mistakes, but when he believes in something, he's gonna do it, and he's gonna say it even if it hurts to hear. He might be wrong like he's been wrong before. He might not want to hurt Bo's feelings when he says that she doesn't understand his sense of loyalty to Bonnie, even if it puts other people in danger. But that sense of knowing that this protagonist is gonna do what he believes in and stick up for it in an argument, even if someone else gets upset, is something, like, I think that's why he's lasted for me. The arguments and disagreements is a layer that Toy Story absolutely needs, and while the film very early establishes this film is very much following Woody, like it's his movie like the first film, that interlock of personalities achieved between Bo and Woody is really a joy to watch across all of their moods, whether it's love, whether it's disagreement, or whether it's camaraderie. Woody, I think here, definitely would have something of an arc more relatable to parents than kids this time too. Him taking care of Bonnie in ways that she'll never see to make sure she's as happy as she can be, and getting through each day feels pretty potent in that regard. The animation performance on him as he wordlessly looks at Buzz right at the very end and gives like he doesn't want to go is really powerful work. Just communicates all that conflict and want and grief and everything just in that little look. Just mwah, whoever did that shot, kudos. Buzz is somewhere where the film misses a little bit for me, unfortunately though. Apart from the very, very ending, his characterization just feels a little strange or pedestrian at times, like he's lost a step in between the films. It takes cues directly from the first film in regard to how he behaves, going back to basics a lot, where he kind of takes things literally, very much at face value, like not being able to understand Woody's metaphor of an inner voice. Now, I'm a big fan of his sense of loyalty and bravery, so while I think this interpretation has merit, it feels a little inconsistent with this character from 2 and 3, where he very much he knows what the right thing to do is without an inner voice. It's a way to give him agency and give him an arc and keep him involved, which is obviously needed, but I don't think this arc is one that really makes the most sense. I would have loved for more Jesse in this movie as well, but I'll just take more Jesse any day of the week anyway, so it's not really saying much. I think of Toy Story 4 very much as a comfort film for me, which I honestly don't have a lot of. I don't turn on a movie just because it'll make me feel good, but this is one of those. And while it can be a little unwieldy, I think it's got a lot of depth and a lot more under the hood than is normal for a Pixar film. It helps me look back on the other 3 films in a new way that I've really, really enjoyed discovering. It reworked old characters, introduced new great ones, and added a story to Woody's arc that I find really wonderful, valuable, and important. I wish at times it felt a bit more dangerous and maybe some of the clunkiness was less apparent, but the amount of feeling that I feel when watching this film is really undeniable to me, and it's the kind of movie that I find some new avenue to appreciate it with each time. Again, I don't have comfort movies. I'm not that sort of viewer, but this is one. That's strange to me. The film was also a bit of a personal moment for me as well, not just in realizing how meaningful Pixar have been in my life as filmmakers the first time I watched this, I just love this studio. But at least the time I watched it, at first I was not really in an awesome place. I was recovering from a surgery for one, but just mentally, long-time viewers of my channel will have had some glimpses at my mental health struggles over the years, and large part that has to do with my own internal struggle between the parts of me that like to be really serious and dour and spooky with the parts that just enjoy being silly and absurd. And Toy Story 4 is a film that to me is pretty well synonymous of embracing and getting back in touch with my silly childlike side and not feeling shame about that. Its message of be who you are right now and learning to place your own value on things really, really hits for me, and it's something that I carry. It represents a tug of war between what you feel you should do just because it's what you've always done and it's always been that way, with what you want to do now, even if it's scary. And on the doorstep of my late 20s, watching this film puts a finger directly in the spot that reminds me no matter how much of a rush I think I'm in, no matter how far behind in life I feel I am, it's always worth living life with a smile and following the thing that makes me happiest, and to accept that what that is and where that's coming from may have changed without me noticing. And maybe it's because I'll just have a lot more life than I expect. Where you place the value of your own life is in your hands, and while change is scary, it's gonna be okay to shift it around. Now, Toy Story 5 has been confirmed for 2026. I think Toy Story is an unalloyed good in the world, and we should be happy that there's gonna be more of it. Don't complain. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. Don't take this away from me. I only want 3 things from this movie. I want more Jesse, obviously. I want there to be maybe, honestly, an adult character who knows about toys being alive and who interacts with them directly. I expect maybe they might go toys versus virtual toys at this point, but I don't really know. I just want to have, the third thing I want is I want to have a good time. I want to be reminded of how I trust this franchise and I know what I want it to do, but I never know what I need the most. I trust Toy Story 5 is going to be a great movie because Toy Story 4 was a great movie, and Toy Story 3 was a great movie, and Toy Story 2 was a great movie, and Toy Story 1 was a great movie, and all of the Pixar movies are pretty great, and I'm a big fan of their work. Alright, thank you everybody for watching this episode of Pixar Quality. It's been a little while. I just haven't really been able to give as much time to video making over the past several months as I maybe would have liked, but I'm back in the saddle a little bit now, and we are going to finish it. We're going to see it through because I need to talk about these movies. If you want to see that, please hit the subscribe button. I'll talk about Batman again at some point, probably. It's fine. Subscribe for that too, I guess.